Evan Miller had learned not to expect surprises. At 17, life had already taught him that hope was something you kept quiet, like a secret you didn't want the world to hear. He had grown up at Cedar Hills Children's Home in western Colorado, a squat brick building that smelled of bleach and cafeteria toast. Every morning was the same: lukewarm oatmeal, chipped mugs, and a loudspeaker calling out chores. No birthdays with candles. No one waiting in the lobby with open arms. Just time passing slow and steady. 3 weeks before his 18th birthday, a woman from the front office tapped on his dorm room door. She didn't smile. She never did. "Evan, there's a letter for you," she said, holding out a cream-colored envelope. The handwriting on it was careful and old-fashioned, like someone had taken their time with every curve of every letter. Inside was a message from a lawyer in Wyoming. A man named Walter Brooks had died 6 weeks earlier. He was Evan's grandfather. Evan sat on the edge of his narrow bed, rereading the words until they blurred. Grandfather. The word felt strange in his mouth, like a language he'd never learned. He had grown up believing he had no family left. His mother had died young. His father had vanished before Evan was old enough to remember his face. The system had filled in the gaps with paperwork and silence. But the letter said Walter Brooks had been looking for him for more than 10 years. 10 years! Every few months, the man had written letters to the state offices, to the foster agencies, to the home where Evan lived. None of them had reached him. Policies, delays, missing records. The lawyer's words were polite and professional, but Evan could hear the truth between the lines. Someone had tried, and the world had failed to answer. Walter had left Evan a small piece of land in a mountain town called Pine Hollow, along with an old wooden house and a box of personal journals. That night, Evan lay awake listening to the wind scrape against the windows. He imagined an old man somewhere in the mountains, waiting for a boy who never came. A man who had loved him from a distance, like a light left on in an empty room. 2 days later, Evan packed everything he owned into a battered backpack. 2 shirts, 1 jacket with a broken zipper, a dog-eared paperback novel, and the letter from the lawyer. The bus ride north took almost 12 hours. The flat farmlands slowly gave way to tall pines and narrow roads that twisted into the hills. The air smelled cleaner the higher they climbed, sharp and cold, like snow waiting its turn. Pine Hollow was smaller than Evan expected. 1 gas station, 1 diner with a flickering neon sign, a single main street lined with wooden storefronts and pickup trucks dusted with frost. The lawyer's office sat above a barber shop with a crooked pole. "You're younger than he thought you'd be," the lawyer said gently, sliding a key across the desk. "He talked about you like you were still a child." They drove out of town on a dirt road until the trees opened into a quiet clearing. And there it was, the house. It looked sturdy but unusual, built of thick logs, weathered silver by time. But the roof was what caught Evan's breath. There were 2 roofs, one layered above the other, separated by open space, like the house was wearing a wooden coat. "People used to call it strange," the lawyer said. "Your grandfather said it was smart." Evan stepped out of the truck and felt the cold wind on his face. He didn't know how to farm. He didn't know how to build. He didn't even know how to belong. But for the first time in his life, something had been left for him. And whatever storms were coming, this place, this strange, quiet house, was all he had. Evan spent his first night in the house wrapped in his jacket, sitting by a cold fireplace he didn't yet know how to use. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the wind sliding through the pines outside. The place smelled like old wood and dust, but also like something steady, like it had been waiting. Morning came pale and gray. Frost covered the grass in the clearing, and his breath turned white as he stepped onto the sagging porch. That was when he noticed the details. The logs were hand-cut and fitted tight. The windows were small but thick, and the roof, 2 layers of it, rose above him like a shelter within a shelter. By noon, Evan walked into Pine Hollow to buy food. The bell over the diner door jingled, and every head turned. Small towns had a way of noticing new faces. "You must be Walter Brooks's grandson," the waitress said, pouring coffee before he even sat down. She was in her 60s with sharp eyes and a kind voice. "Name's Ruth. Your granddad used to come in every Sunday." "He did?" Evan asked. Ruth nodded. "Always sat by the window. Always talked about a boy who'd come someday." The warmth of that almost made Evan forget the man standing near the counter. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a flannel shirt and a scowl that looked permanent. "That house won't last one real winter," the man said, loud enough for everyone to hear. 2 roofs? That's just extra weight waiting to fall. Ruth's mouth tightened. Frank Dalton, this is Evan. Frank Dalton looked Evan up and down like he was inspecting a fence post. I've built every house in this valley for 30 years, he said. Your granddad was stubborn and strange. That roof of his is a mistake. Evan felt his chest tighten. He built it that way on purpose. Doesn't mean it's right, Frank said. You'd be smart to sell the land. I'll give you a fair price. Go back to wherever you came from before the snow buries you. Evan didn't answer. He took his groceries and left, the words following him out into the cold. Back at the cabin, he opened the wooden box the lawyer had given him. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, filled with careful handwriting, sketches, and measurements. His grandfather's thoughts, preserved in ink. 2 roofs create still air. Still air holds heat. Outer roof sheds wine and snow before they reach the inner structure. Evan ran his fingers over the pages. Walter Brooks hadn't been guessing. He'd been planning. All afternoon, he patched loose boards and sealed cracks with what little he had. His hands blistered. His stomach growled. But he kept going, driven by something deeper than fear. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, a pickup truck slowed at the edge of the clearing. Frank Dalton sat behind the wheel, watching. You're wasting your time, kid, Frank called out. Winter up here doesn't care about notebooks. Evan straightened, sweat cold on his neck. Maybe, but this is what he left me. Frank shook his head. You don't even know what you're protecting. As the truck drove away, clouds thickened in the sky. The radio crackled with talk of early snow and falling temperatures. Evan stood alone in front of the strange house, the wind tugging at his jacket. He didn't know how bad the winter would be. He didn't know who to trust. But he knew one thing. Someone had built this place for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was about to be tested. The first snow came early in November, soft and quiet, like the mountain was testing its voice. Evan watched it from the porch, flakes settling on the strange double roof and sliding off the outer layer in thin white sheets. The radio in the kitchen kept warning about unstable weather patterns and dropping pressure, but no one in Pine Hollow seemed worried. Snow was normal. Winter was expected. What wasn't normal was how fast it grew mean. By mid-December, the nights sharpened. Wind cut through the trees like a blade. Evan woke each morning to ice on the inside of the windows and a sky the color of steel. He spent his days fixing what his grandfather's notes told him to fix, tightening supports between the 2 roofs, sealing gaps where cold air could sneak in, reinforcing joints with scrap lumber from the shed. In town, people watched him work like he was part of a show. Frank Dalton drove past almost every afternoon. Sometimes he slowed. Sometimes he laughed. That roof's gonna fold like a card table, he said once, leaning out his truck window. You'll be begging for a ride out of here when it does. Evan didn't answer. His hands were too busy. His mind was too focused. One night at Ruth's Diner, the talk turned serious. Old men leaned over coffee cups and spoke in lower voices. Birds left early this year. Barometer's wrong. Feels like 82 all over again. Evan asked what happened in 82. Storm took 3 barns and a school roof, Ruth said. Cold came down like it was hunting people. That night, the wind started screaming. By the next morning, snow wasn't drifting. It was flying sideways. The road out of Pine Hollow vanished under white. Evan shoveled until his arms shook, piling snow away from the base of the cabin. Inside, the fire stayed steady. The air between the 2 roofs trapped warmth like his grandfather had promised. On the second day, roofs in town began to sag. Evan saw it through binoculars. Frank Dalton's place, the Hendersons' house, the feed store's awning bowing under the weight. Snow packed thick and heavy, pressing down like a giant hand. Then came the sound. A crack. Then another. Then a deep, sickening collapse that echoed through the valley. Evan's radio sputtered with voices, panicked, broken by static. Dalton house is down. Hendersons are evacuating. No power, roads blocked. The mountain had stopped testing. It was attacking. By nightfall, visibility dropped to nothing. Wind slammed into the cabin so hard the walls groaned. Evan stood in the middle of the room, heart pounding, listening to the storm rage like it had a will of its own. And then, a knock. He froze. Another knock, louder, desperate. Evan opened the door to a wall of white and a shape stumbling forward. Frank Dalton stood there, his beard crusted with ice, holding a little girl wrapped in blankets. Behind him, a woman clutched a boy to her chest. Our roof collapsed, Frank said, his voice raw. We've got nowhere else. For a moment, Evan remembered every laugh, every insult, every warning to sell and leave. Then he remembered his grandfather's words in the notebook. A house is only strong if it protects people. He stepped aside. Come in. The storm howled outside, but inside the strange double-roofed house, warmth waited. And before the night was over, more footsteps would follow. Frank's family collapsed into the warmth like they'd crossed into another world. Steam rose from their frozen coats. The little girl whimpered until Evan wrapped her in one of his spare blankets and set her close to the fire. The boy stayed silent, eyes wide, clinging to his grandmother's sleeve, as if the wind might still reach in and take him. Thank you, Frank said hoarsely. It sounded like the hardest word he'd spoken in years. Evan nodded, unsure what to say. Outside, the storm howled like something alive. Inside, the cabin held steady. The space between the two roofs trapped heat just as the journals had promised. The fire didn't fight the cold. It outsmarted it. An hour later, the next knock came. Then another. And another. By midnight, families from Pine Hollow were stumbling through the snow toward the only roof still standing. Ruth arrived with her husband and a sack of canned food tied in a scarf. The Hendersons followed, soaked and shaking. Even the town pastor showed up, carrying his pregnant wife through the drifts with frost in his beard. Evan didn't turn anyone away. He organized what little space he had. Kids near the fire, adults along the walls, blankets layered like patchwork. Snow melted in pots on the stove for water. The cabin that had once felt too big now felt impossibly small, but it was alive with breath, voices, and fear. Frank worked beside Evan without being asked. He chopped wood. He carried water. He didn't argue. He didn't joke. Pride had burned out of him in the cold. I was wrong, he said quietly at one point, staring at the ceiling. About your grandfather. About all of it. Evan said nothing. He just handed him another log for the fire. Late that night, when the storm sounded like it was tearing the mountain apart, Ruth spoke up. Walter Brooks saved this town once before, she said, back in the winter of '82. Same kind of storm. His roof held when others didn't. Heads turned. He took in 12 people, she went on. Didn't ask who they were or what they'd said about him. Just opened the door. Frank's jaw tightened. I mocked him for that roof, he admitted. Said it was foolish. If he was right, it meant I was wrong. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the fire. The next morning, the radio crackled through dead air and static. Power lines down, multiple roof failures, emergency crews delayed. No one knew how long the storm would last. Food ran low. Sleep came in pieces. Fear crept in with the night. And then just before dawn on the third day, a woman went into labor. The pastor's wife cried out, clutching her stomach. Panic spread like fire. There was no hospital, no road out, just wind and snow and a cabin on a hill. I was a nurse, Frank's wife said suddenly. Her voice shook, but her hands didn't. Years ago, they boiled water. They closed curtains. The storm pounded on the roof while life fought its way into the world below it. A baby boy was born just as the wind began to ease. When the cries faded into quiet breathing, something changed in the room. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. By afternoon, the clouds thinned. Sunlight touched the snow like mercy. People stepped outside and stared at the wreckage of their town. Half the roofs had failed. Walls had caved. Barns lay crushed under white weight, but the strange house on the hill still stood. Frank removed his hat. Your grandfather knew something we forgot, he said, and you remembered it for us. Evan looked at the cabin, at the double roof, at the smoke rising, steady into clear sky. For the first time, Pine Hollow saw it not as a joke, but as a promise kept. Spring came slowly to Pine Hollow, like it was afraid to trust the sky again. Snow melted into muddy rivers along Main Street. Broken boards and collapsed roofs were stacked in tired piles beside houses that had survived just barely. The town looked older, thinner, but quieter, like it had learned something it couldn't unlearn. Frank Dalton came to Evan's cabin one morning with his hat in his hands. I want to learn, he said, not just fix things the way I always did. I want to build them the way your grandfather did. Evan hesitated. He remembered the laughter, the warnings, the way Frank had told him to sell and run. But he also remembered Frank carrying his granddaughter through the storm and the way he'd worked through the nights without being asked. So Evan opened the box of journals. They spent weeks studying the old drawings together, how the outer roof shed snow before it could pile up, how the air gap trapped warmth, How the weight was carried down through angled beams instead of pressing straight down? It wasn't magic, it was patience. It was wisdom passed hand to hand instead of screen to screen. The first new house went up in late summer. People gathered to watch. No one laughed this time. When winter returned the following year, the new roofs held. The rooms stayed warm, and something else held too, the town itself. Pine Hollow didn't just rebuild houses, it rebuilt trust. Ruth's diner added a photo to the wall. Walter Brooks standing beside his strange house, snow piled high around him, smiling like he already knew how the story would end. Beneath it was a simple sign, built for the storm. Years passed. Evan stayed. He married a school teacher who came to town to help reopen the damaged classrooms. They raised their kids in the shadow of the double roof, teaching them that strength wasn't loud and love didn't always arrive on time. Every winter, tourists came to see the house that survived. Every winter, Evan told the same story, about a grandfather who built something for a boy he never met, about a town that learned too late and then learned for good, about a storm that didn't just destroy, but revealed. One night, his youngest son asked, "Why didn't Grandpa Walter give up?" Evan thought about the letters that were never delivered, the plans hidden in boxes, the house waiting in the cold. Because love prepares, he said, even when no one's watching. Now it's your turn to think about that. Have you ever found out someone cared about you in a way you didn't see at the time? Have you ever had to trust something old when everything around you said it wouldn't work? And if you were standing in the snow, with a door in front of you and people who once doubted you knocking to be let in, what would you do? If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people who quietly built something for your future, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about second chances, hidden love, and the strength of ordinary people, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this waiting for you. Because sometimes the greatest gift isn't what someone leaves behind. It's what they built to protect you before you even knew you needed it.